Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Tom Secker. His last name is spelled Secker. And his name came across my radar after interviewing and reading a book by Matthew Alford. The title of the book is National Security Cinema, The Shocking New Evidence of Government Control in Hollywood. And you can go back and listen to that interview at William Ramsey Investigates. So that kind of made me want to reach out to Tom. I've been looking through his website, which has encyclopedic amounts of information on spy culture. And the title of his website is spyculture.com. And he is a British-based journalist, author, and podcaster. His specialties include the security services, Hollywood propaganda, censorship, and the history of terrorism. His writing and research has appeared in The Mirror, The Express, RT Salon, Newsweek, The Atlantic, The Independent, Harper's, Insurge Intelligence, Shadowproof, Tech Dirt, and elsewhere. He lives on the Lancashire coast and is a proud northerner. And his favorite spy is Eddie Chapman, aka Agent Zigzag. And his podcast is Clandestine, not clandestine, but Clandestine. And you can find that at his website under the heading of podcast on spyculture.com. But today we're going to talk about an interesting, really fascinating movie that was ahead of its time called Enemy of the State. So Tom Secker, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Hey, William, thanks for having me.
So for people who may not have heard your background, and you've done just tons of research, your website is chock full of stuff. Can you kind of talk about your background, what got you interested in kind of spy culture or espionage, and what brought you to kind of your inquiry into Enemy of the State?
Well, there's a big, broad question, I guess. I mean, I'm British. I grew up reading spy novels. I grew up watching spy movies. And in this country, it's a big part of our culture. And to some extent, it was British authors who kind of not necessarily invented the spy novel, but certainly were a big part of turning it into one of the genres of the 20th century. And it was as I was reading these things and learning about their authors and realizing just how many of these people were themselves either currently working with the intelligence agencies as they were writing these books, or certainly there was a lot of intelligence veterans, spy veterans who were part of this world, part of the spy genre, if you like. And so, you take someone like Ian Fleming, who worked for British Naval Intelligence and was very, very close to what would become MI5 and MI6. He not only wrote the James Bond novels, but he was also like a technical advisor, a consultant producer or something on the films. And that, has become one of the biggest movie franchises of all time. And so it was looking into all of that kind of thing. And then I guess it was sometime in the mid-2000s, I picked up David Robb's book, Operation Hollywood, and that got me into the more military side of this, sort of building out from the intelligence agencies to encompass other parts of the government as well. And I guess I've also, just broadly speaking, had a fascination with propaganda, or at least how it is that art and culture inspires certain attitudes and ideas in people, how it encourages certain mentalities and so on. That's always been something I'm very interested in, whether we're talking, linguistics or semiotics or cinema or, anything else. And so combining this stuff together, it was sometime around 2012, I think, when I first started the website. And one of the inspirations was Matt's work. I stumbled across that in the course of researching this. Of course, I did. Also, Tricia Jenkins' book, the first edition of her CIA in Hollywood book, came out in 2012, 2013. And so I basically just kind of looked at all of this stuff and thought, look, there's clearly something going on here. There's something quite important going on here. It's a transatlantic and possibly global thing. It's getting taken seriously by academics, so it's credible. There's stuff you can get to here that's like credible source material. And there was, particularly around like the controversy around Zero Dark 30, you may remember the 2012 Oscars and all of that. I thought there is also news value to this. So why not put together a site that brings all of this stuff together, that tries to get hold of all of this source material and just make it available to anyone. So whether it's researchers, academics, journalists, media people, or just random members of the public who are interested in propaganda and the government, they can access this. And also I can use all of that source material as the basis for podcasts and videos and articles and so on. And so that's what I did. And the first iteration of the site, which was quite a basic version, I think, of the site, went up late 2012, early 2013. And since then, the site's evolved. I've added as you can see, endless amounts of content. I have no idea actually how much content, how many different posts there are on there now. But like I say, there's podcasts, there's videos, there's lots of articles, there's all these document posts. Pretty much everything I've got, I stick up on the site. Although at this point, frankly, I have so much stuff, it would take the rest of my life probably to go through it all in detail and actually, break it down into, podcasts and articles and so on. But yeah, it's kind of, I wanted there to be a resource that people could go to learn about this, and there wasn't such a thing out there. And so I thought, I'm just going to make it myself.
Right. And you just have a wide variety of different topics, films, people, cultural analysis. So much of the stuff you talked about, 3 Days of Condor, Goldfinger. If you're on YouTube, you can see his site and just tons of great information for somebody like me. Like I was looking through it over the last couple of days. And then you have the podcast too. And what kind of led you towards this seminal film, Enemy of the State?
Well, that was one that came up in the course of researching the CIA primarily, because while the DoD, the military, the US military, the Pentagon, and to a certain extent the FBI have been up to this since at least the 1930s, I mean, in some cases even earlier, the CIA didn't get formally involved in Hollywood until the mid-90s. And so one of the challenges has been to try and figure out what have they actually been doing since then, because they're much more resistant to freedom of information requests and other typical investigative methods that one might use to try and establish some of this stuff. You know what I mean? And so digging into the CIA, among other things, we found that on the making of for the DVD for Enemy of the State, Will Smith actually talks about visiting CIA headquarters. And then it turns out it's actually listed on, or was listed, on the website of a man called Chase Brandon, who was the CIA's Hollywood liaison for about a decade, from around 96 to 2006, give or take. And so we started, we started, I guess all of us have been looking into this to some extent for a while, digging into this movie. And then it turned out some emails came out, again via a FOIA request, from the NSA that essentially revealed that the producers had had some kind of relationship with the NSA in the course of making this movie. So that's not just one major intelligence agency, it's two. And then I stumbled across an interview with Jerry Bruckheimer in, I can't remember, I think it was the Baltimore Sun, because a lot of the film is shot in Baltimore and set, in fact, in Baltimore. And Jerry Bruckheimer said, yeah, we've been in touch with the NSA. Yeah, they had a look at the script and they did ask us to make a change. And that major change was that instead of the surveillance on the Will Smith character being just a general result of the entire institution of the NSA, as it was in the script at that time, and if you go back and find these draft scripts online, you can confirm this. They said, no, we want it all to be pinned on one like rogue bad actor. One sort of psycho who just gets carried away and some other people around him who don't necessarily really know what's going on. So it's only really him that's guilty, not the institution as a whole. And this is quite a pattern that you see in spy films, intelligence films, even war films. It's like, who's responsible for the war crime? Oh, it's just one rogue officer and a couple of people below him. It's not an institutional problem. It's not a problem of the culture within these institutions. It's not a problem of the very situation we've put them into. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that kind of change was made by the NSA. And like I say, I confirmed this by digging up old scripts of the film and finding out, yeah, actually in the early drafts, it was kind of the NSA as a whole that were doing this, whereas in the final film, it's all essentially just John Voight's character. Right. So that's the sort of thing that can go on, that they can make fundamental changes to the characterization and the narratives and hence the values and ideas and so on that are in these movies.
And that this is like a super paranoiac movie because the Voight's agents are following him around in a white van with complete transparency into his technology, into the Will Smith character's technology, right?
Yeah. I mean, without getting too much into the plot of the movie, he's a lawyer and he stumbles across something that means the NSA or this small team within the NSA are targeting him. And I mean, at the time, it was actually quite a shocking movie because I don't think people realized the extent of the NSA. I mean, most people probably didn't even realize the NSA existed Prior to, I think, the early 70s, pretty much no one outside of the NSA knew that the NSA existed. So even by the late 90s, they weren't a widely known agency. So there's that. There's the extent of the surveillance in terms of tapping his phones, his bank accounts, planting bugs and cameras in his home, but also in particular the satellite surveillance. They have those mocked up versions of like a surveillance satellite following him around. And I think a lot of people, certainly when you go back and you read reviews and other, comments and things about the film, there's a lot of people who said, this was really shocking at the time. We just hadn't seen this before. Now, why is it that people hadn't seen so much electronic surveillance before on the TV screens and in the movie theaters? Well, one of the reasons actually is the FBI. Because, like I say, they've been involved in Hollywood since the 1930s. And one of the things they're really sensitive about is electronic surveillance. They don't like depicting wiretaps and bugs and so on. And so any movie or TV show that worked with the FBI, who kind of dominated the American spy genre in the middle of the 20th century and towards the end of it, couldn't depict these things. They just wrote them out of the script. And so by the time Enemy of the State comes along, it's like this kind of stuff had been going on for decades, but
right,
most people didn't know about it. So like I say, it had this very shocking effect. And so I don't know, I'm left wondering what was in it for the NSA and the CIA. Why were they working on this movie that kind of blew the lid off what they were actually up to?
That's a good point. The movie came out in 1998, just so people remember. So it was before a lot of exposure of how intense surveillance capacities were and with other whistleblowers, right?
Well, sure. If you think a lot of this stuff came out post 9/11, all the warrantless wiretapping, and then you've got various, Thomas Drake, I guess, Edward Snowden, others who've very much blown the whistle in some manner of speaking on this. And just as a weird thing, because I know you're into weird Hollywood stuff, so I think you'll find this quite entertaining. Think about the Gene Hackman character in Enemy of the State. He's called Edward. He used to work for the NSA. He lives in Baltimore, and he's running around kind of avoiding the NSA, but also trying to use their secrets against them. Does that remind you of anyone?
It's Edward Snowden, right?
Yeah, basically. Snowden grew up in Baltimore. He went to Baltimore Community College. All of this, it fits in. Now, I don't know what on earth we make of that, given that this film came out in 98, and at that point Snowden was like 15 years old or something.
Right. But Hackman's interesting too, because he was in an earlier super paranoid surveillance movie called Conversation that I think was the early one for, what's the Italian guy's name who directed The Godfather? Did you ever see The Conversation?
I have seen The Conversation,
yeah.
Of course. And in many ways, Hackman's character in Enemy of the State is like the older version of the character he plays in that movie. And there are scenes. There's the scene where Will Smith and his... it's like the lawyer that he used to have an affair with, and he meets up with her in a park, and the whole thing's being surveyed by the NSA. That's based on a scene in The Conversation. When you listen to Scott on the DVD commentary, he says, we basically ripped off this sequence almost shot for shot from The Conversation. It's like an updated homage to that film. But yeah, that's one of those great 70s paranoid conspiracy thrillers. I really love those movies. I love that whole genre of film. So,
yeah. And who was the director? It was the guy who directed The Godfather, right? It was, what's his name? No, I can't remember. But yeah, no, that's a classic. But the other thing, do you know that there's like a hidden 9/11 in The Enemy of the State? I think that the Edward character was born on 9/11.
Yeah. It's in his passport or his birth certificate or something. It's mentioned. Yeah.
But there's all kinds of references to real world. Tom, there's other references to real world events because William Colby, the intro scene looks like the William Colby death, right? That he was found dead in a river in 1996, another intel guy. And it's almost like they picked that background.
It may be somewhat inspired by, shall we say, what happened to Colby. I mean, there are other mysterious deaths in the water. I mean, you interviewed Matt. One of the things Matt and I have kind of dwelt on, only in a speculative way, because we can't really figure it out, is actually, especially with the car being kind of rolled into the water, that's very actually reminiscent of what happened with Gary DeVore the Hollywood screenwriter who
Oh, the
disappeared,
hands, right?
murdered, something, and his body supposedly turns up in this car in a river that it never should have been in. And this is all happening around the time when Enemy of the State was being made. So whether there's a connection there, I simply don't know. But if you want to get into speculative, weird Hollywood stuff, which some people do, the Enemy of the State there's quite a lot to unravel there, is basically.
There really is. There really, I mean, interesting people. Bruckheimer has a colorful background. Will Smith has a colorful background. I mean, there's a lot of curious. And those guys, all these guys who were like the followers, had very. It was the beginning of their career, right? Jack Black and some of these other people.
Well, I mean, when it comes to the director Tony Scott and the producer Jerry Bruckheimer, if you think back, their first probably big blockbuster, like the really big one that made them a name, was Top Gun, which is, of course, another Pentagon-supported film. It's like the classic Pentagon-supported film of the last, our lifetimes, at least, anyway. And so, yeah, both of them went on to make films with all sorts of government agencies. But yeah, also, in terms of the cast, there were a number of relatively young people, who mostly playing like the NSA guys or the, what does he call them, the ex-military cutouts. I mean, who actually talks like that? Let's just get some ex-military cutouts. That's not how people talk in these agencies, trust me. I mean, that's what they do, but it's not like how they would say it. All of those characters. There's the younger Busey, not Gary Busey, Jake Busey.
Oh, right, yeah.
He's one of the, like the special ops guys who's sort of running around kicking down the doors and things. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them in this, and it did sort of put them not quite into the A-list, but made them blockbuster stars, established that they're blockbuster stars. Someone's just said there's Sean Penn is CIA. That's a curious one because, I mean, he did star in a CIA-supported movie, Fair Game, about the whole Valerie Plame affair, and several years later was involved with the CIA's efforts to capture El Chapo Guzman, the cartel leader. And now he's off in Ukraine shooting a documentary, though I haven't actually heard anything from him for about 3-4 weeks. I don't know what Sean Penn's, I hope he's still all right, to be honest.
Really, I was curious. Yeah, I mean, these are just a whole bunch of strange characters. I actually interviewed a guy, his name is Robert Kerbeck, who grew up with Valerie Plame. And so he just interviewed her recently. They kind of crossed paths again or whatever, reconnected. And so you can look up Robert Kerbeck's social media and you'll find his interview with Valerie Plame. So she's still around. So anyway, interesting. And a lot of this stuff was precursors. I read somewhere that somebody at the NSA complained that it was too revealing, that the film was too revealing. Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, there were some concerns about this. When you read the NSA's internal emails that were released about the film, it doesn't only detail, how producers went on a tour of headquarters and some other things that were, obviously some kind of favors granted to them by the agency. It also has quite a lot of their reactions in it. So, yeah, there were some people who were concerned that because they actually denied the filmmakers permission to do like a flyover shot, like an aerial of the building. And so what they actually did was got a plane that went over the height of the restricted airspace and shot it from a very long distance, long lens did, in order to get that shot of the NSA building. And people were concerned about this because they were like, oh, they might be able to read the license plates on the cars. And it's sort of, no, this is a Hollywood movie, not a spy satellite. Your satellites can read the license plates on the cars, but that's a camera in a helicopter or in a plane. It's, their technology isn't as good as yours. But yeah, there were some concerns about sort of, is this either... I mean, there weren't that many concerns about it portraying them badly. That was the thing. And if you think, like I say, because of that script change, the NSA as a whole doesn't come across that bad. It is mostly just John Voight and his merry band of young psychopaths. So, yeah, it was more a concern about, are they showing too much? Are we revealing too much? Are we telling the audience too much about what it is of what we do? And in fact, it did lead Michael Hayden, who one of the few people to have been, I think the only person to have been the head of the CIA and the NSA, he embarked on a kind of PR campaign, if you like, after this, in order to try and help put the NSA out there in a friendly way. And, you know, he did interviews, and other high officials within the agency did interviews. And you have to think back, given that the NSA probably had the most information, the most intelligence on what on earth was going on in those years running up to 9/11, even more than the CIA did. And hardly anyone blames them. You know, the CIA have got some flack, the FBI have got a lot of flack. No one really talks about the NSA in that particular mess. And you have to wonder, what on earth are they really up to? I mean, if that's a film that they helped to make and it portrays, you know, fairly blunt terms, especially for 1998, and ultimately they were okay with it. It's like, what are they really doing? How dark are they really? You know, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very dark. I mean, I think that somebody was the NSA whistleblower, the most recent one. I can't remember his name offhand, but he said that the NSA got all of the Supreme Court's information and was blackmailing them. Right? I can't remember his name. He's an older guy. I think he wrote one of the software programs. If somebody is listening to this remembers his name, but he's been
Bill
on.
Binney?
Yeah, Bill Binney. Yeah, Bill Binney.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. That's the kind of things these intelligence agencies are actually doing. And when we actually see a film portraying those kinds of things, and not just some small, you know, low budget made for $3 million and stuck out on Netflix kind of movie, but, you know, something big that shows in theaters and has big names attached, then maybe that moves the needle a bit. But the question I'm always left with Enemy of the State is, once that initial kind of shocking feeling fades, is the effect of the film just normalization? Does it actually make it seem like, okay, this is kind of disturbing and weird, but if that's what they do, then that's what they do. And you know, we're flooded in the news and the commentary act with all these arguments about, oh, well, who are you to make these sorts of judgments? You're not on the insides of these agencies. You don't know what they know. You don't see the threats that we face every day. And so a film like this very much fits into that dialogue and very much encourages people to think, oh, well, I mean, I just don't know how dangerous the world is. So isn't it good, in fact, that the NSA is out there dealing with this on our behalf, so that we don't have to, so that we don't have to think about these things. We don't have to figure this out.
Yeah, leave it to us. We can handle it. We'll be your big brother, and, you know, don't think too much. But I mean, some of the payments, the NSA, I think, is bigger than the CIA or something. Like, their amount of money that they're receiving is considerable. I can't remember what it is, but they have huge databases.
Oh, I mean, yeah, the NSA is the biggest intelligence agency as far as I know, certainly within the US government. And it's a similar kind of story over here. GCHQ, our equivalent of the NSA, is the biggest of our intel. It's bigger than MI5 than MI6. It gets the biggest proportion of that budget. I mean, in America, you can probably find out at least some of those numbers, or they will have been leaked somewhere. Over here, they just don't tell you. They kind of show you graphs, but they've scrubbed out the numbers. So it's like, why are you even showing me this? They're so even more secretive over here than they are in America, trust me. But yeah, there's an enormous amount of resource that gets put into this kind of eavesdropping, this kind of surveillance. It makes you wonder just how much have they swept up? How much is on all these databases and all these server farms? And in fact, how many of these server farms that pop up all over the place are actually being run by the government rather than being just used for, you know, everyday internet traffic like what we're doing?
Right. Excellent point. I think during the Bush administration, there was a revealing release or a whistleblower who said that behind the AT&T server farms, the government had server farms leeching off of all of that information. I remember that was in San Francisco. I don't know if you remember that story, but
I don't recall that particular one, but yeah, it's that sort of thing. Someone's just asked here, who's behind the NSA, who controls it? Actually, it's technically part of the Department of Defense. It's part of the Pentagon. It's like, if you look on the organizational chart, you have the different military branches, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and what have you. Yeah, it's basically part of the DoD.
Right. And I think that there's in that area, whatever, somewhere in between DC and Baltimore, there is a huge NSA facility that's like the size of a college, right? Just huge buildings and totally secretive. I think that's the one that Snowden worked in, right?
Yeah, that's the one at Fort Meade. I can't remember whether that's north of Baltimore or south of Baltimore. It's definitely in that whole, like, you know, that whole area that also encompasses bits of Northern Virginia. Basically, all of the intelligence is there. Naval intelligence, Marine Corps, CIA, FBI. They've all got their headquarters in that one like little bit sort of tri-state area, and it's it's kind of terrifying, really, to
It's
think
terrifying.
that a few counties in northern Virginia and south of DC are kind of monitoring almost everything that's going on in the world, or at least everything that they can, everything that they can plug into. They're trying to keep an eye on it. And even if no human being is actually looking at it, they're still sticking the cable into a database and recording all this so they can go back and look at it later if they need to, if they feel like they want to.
Good point. So they can go back and look at people's histories and whatever and all that stuff. And it reminds me, this movie, Enemy of the State, reminds me of the Matt Damon films where like they're tracking him too, where they're trying to get real live data and information and going into the back of video cameras.
The Bourne trilogy.
Yes, yeah, the Bourne. It reminds me of Bourne. Interesting.
Well, they too were supported by the CIA.
Makes sense.
It turns out. And yeah, I mean, this is actually a curious one, because in an interview, Chase Brandon, the guy who was running the CIA's office at that time, he said he had a look at the Bourne script, the one for the first one, the Bourne Identity. He said it was so bad he tossed it in the burn bag after page 35.
Wow.
And yet, he appears on the special edition DVD in a bonus feature praising the movie and talking about how realistic it is and how this is actually what CIA operatives are really like.
Wow. That's incredible. It's incredible.
They do just, say, oh, no, we didn't work on that movie. And then, 10 years later, you get a document or something that proves that they did. And it's like,
right. It's incredible. And I think the book that you wrote with Alfred goes back in history, and all these guys, are involved. H. Howard Hunt's involved with Orwell's reception here. And I think it was the psychological impact of films was from the OSS. So they're aware of all that stuff going back 70 years. Easy.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, actually, that memo from the OSS is kind of it's almost a roadmap for what the CIA did in Hollywood for the next 30 or 40 years. And indeed, kind of the policies that America adopted towards its own film industry. It talks about things in that memo, not just in terms of like psychological warfare, but also industrial terms. Like, how do we get our films into countries so we can project the desired imagery into their minds, get these publics on our side in terms of soft power and Cold War tactics and so on. And this is what they did. They tried to hammer away all of those restrictions and any, because a lot of countries have quotas on how many foreign films come in, so they don't destroy their domestic film industry.
Right.
So, because if all the theaters show is American films, then, wherever, Spain can't develop its own film industry because everyone's just going to see American films. And so they spent years, decades really, hammering away at those sorts of restrictions. And they're now facing this sort of problem with China, for example. China actually has quite a strict quota on how many US films it allows in, and obviously has quite a stringent censorship board, let's say, for films coming in to be exhibited in China. And that's a serious problem for the industry. It's one of the reasons why you see lots of articles about it, but curiously few articles about what the American government is up to in the entertainment industry, which is much larger than what China's doing, trust me. I mean, I'm not happy about political censorship of films in China. I'm not defending that. I'm just saying, if you want to talk government propaganda and censorship in Hollywood, then we have to start with the American government because they're the biggest player.
Right, and what's interesting about Enemy of the State is its legs, its lasting power. It's still being reshown all the time on TV. So it really, I think it really struck a nerve or was impactful in that regard as far as this kind of a spy thriller goes.
Well, Tony Scott did say he wanted to make something like a 70s conspiracy thriller, but with updated filmmaking and technology and so on. And if you think about it, has anyone made something of that type? That sort of really neurotic, high-paced kind of surveillance thriller that's also an action film. Has anyone made anything that's good like that since then?
I don't know. I don't think so. What was the one? Eagle's Nest, I think, was one, or I can't remember what. That was like one where you're in total surveillance state. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, sure. There's that. There's the Tom Cruise one from 2002.
Right.
A couple of others maybe, but that's what I mean, because no other film, I think, has really done quite what Enemy of the State did, or certainly not done it as well with such a big cast.
Right.
That's one of the reasons it has longevity.
Eagle Eye, thank you, Drone Dynasty. Eagle Eye.
Yeah, Eagle Eye, sure. An FBI-supported film.
Wow. It's all there. They're just puppeteering the whole thing, man. You're watching a bunch of marionettes about secret players behind, and that goes into approval. I mean, and Simpson and Bruckheimer are notorious. I mean, Simpson, what was exposed about that guy who was Bruckheimer's producing buddy, he was off the charts. It was off the charts. Simpson was really something else. He was basically like his own pharmaceutical guy. He had tons of drugs and,
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood people do tend to be a bit kind of nuts.
No, nuts.
I think that's one of the reasons why they're easy to manipulate, to be honest. Because I often get asked, do people not push back against this? And to be honest, every once in a while they do. There are screenwriters who said, no, I'm not making these script changes. We'll go make the film without you if necessary. But usually they don't. And it's because, a lot of them are kind of soft. They don't care. As long as they get to be rich and live their lifestyles and get famous making movies, they're not all that bothered about what they're making. So if some government department turns up and says, no, you're not allowed to mention the CIA in this movie, they'll go, okay, we'll just call them something else. We don't care. There's no skin off our nose. We still make money. We still get to do everything else we're doing. So they just go along with it. Hollywood is actually sort of has this reputation for being quite, I don't know, political or something. But deep down, I don't think most of these people really care. I think they're kind of quite vapid, narcissistic people, and so they're easy to push around. Whether you're a weapons manufacturer or a product placement company or the Department of Homeland Security, you can get what you want out of them, because as long as they get what they want out of it, they really don't care.
Right. No, it's a good point. I mean, and the other thing is, if you have the government supporting you, why not make their film? Because the films get made, they get greenlit, and you get in front of the camera. Like you have Ben Affleck right there on the cover of your Spy Culture thing, and there's a perfect example. He's had a privileged career doing all these pro-America films, right?
Well, he won an Oscar for that movie. Yeah. You think someone like Ben Affleck wins an Oscar without doing something like that? So, and in fact, that image from that video, that's him outside CIA headquarters. You can actually, if you look in the background, you can see just a little bit of Langley.
Which, I think you show in your book, National Security Cinema, that's a coveted thing. That wasn't something that the CIA was very amenable to, is filming by them. So the ability to film in front of that headquarters can tell you something. Would you agree with that?
Well, when you think about all the different spy movies and TV shows and what have you that get made, it's quite a competitive market. It's quite a competitive genre, right? So how do you make yours stand out? Well, usually the answer is so-called authenticity. You make it feel like you're getting a real glimpse behind the scenes into this secret world. That's what they're supposedly offering their audience. And to some extent they are actually giving you that, but it's sort of a version of that world that's been curated and edited by the people who actually live in that world. So make of that what you will. But this is why being able to film at a military base or CIA headquarters or FBI headquarters, it just adds to the luster and the production value of a movie. And it grants it a greater credibility in the eyes of the audience. It's all of these things. And these agencies know this. They know, it says sometimes in their document, added production value. They know what it is that they're offering in exchange for, like I say, censorship and propaganda. And so, yeah, there aren't that many films. I get into it in that Ben Affleck video on my site. First one was in the early 1970s. Then they didn't let anyone film there until Patriot Games, really, until in 1992. There's maybe one or two others from the 90s. There's a couple from the 2000s. There really aren't very many in terms of people who've been granted that kind of access.
Right. Interesting. Tom, we're at about 33 minutes. Are you available to take a few questions?
Of course.
Kill Bao asks, have you seen the film The Final Option? That was one of the first films to show the Special Air Service in action. Have you heard of The Final Option?
I don't think I have seen this film.
No. Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Another one, Oswald asks, what does Tom Secker think of Ben Affleck starring in Sean Stone's biopic? Sean Stone's biopic. I'm assuming Ben Affleck will not have aged from transhumanism once Sean is dead. What's Sean Stone's biopic, Oswald? I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is, Tom?
I'm not sure what you're driving at there. No.
Okay.
Is this a future biopic that may happen?
Yeah, you guys got some good obscure questions. Lee asks, "What do you think about the upcoming film Killers of the Flower Moon? Do you know what that's about?"
Again, I'm not familiar with this movie. People
Oh,
need to
man.
give slightly more information.
These guys are tough. They're throwing curveballs today. These are not soft one. Telepon is a Pelican Brief and Conspiracy Theorist are both good films and both star Julia Roberts as Drone Dynasty. Anybody have any questions you could ask that Tom could answer? I mean, I would definitely go to his website.
I have heard of this movie. Yeah, I'm 90% sure this film was to some extent made with the help of the FBI, because they are very, very protective of any film that depicts J. Edgar Hoover. Even now, even like decades after the man's dead, he holds such a sway over that institution, if you know what I mean, because he was the head of that institution for the first 40, 50 years of its existence. Yeah, the documents I've seen are they're very, very particular about how Hoover is portrayed. Even if we're talking like stuff he did back in the 20s and 30s, where you could say, oh, well, it was back then. The world's moved on. Times have changed. It's still like, no. And so I think, yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon may well be some kind of FBI propaganda movie.
Interesting. And what can people see when they check out your podcast? Your podcast is, the title of it again is Clandestine, right? Clandestine.
Yeah. I mean, you can find that on my site, on spyculture.com, and on all of those apps that are there on the screen for those of you watching, and a whole load of other apps, to be honest. I mean, if you just search for Clandestine on whatever podcast app or downloader or whatever it is that you use, it'll probably be on there. And they can find, I mean, I guess, quite a wide range of stuff. I do sometimes do straight movie and book reviews, but they're usually with some kind of covert ops or, covert warfare, psychological warfare theme. I do quite a lot of analysis of the files and documents that we've got and, go through the movies in quite a lot of detail and explain how this scene was changed to this and what they were trying to do with that and, why they make these changes. There's a lot of just discussion of anything that films at Langley. Basically, I watch and review and say what I think the CIA were getting out of this, or look where possible, look at the documents and find that. So all that kind of stuff. I've also done a series or a sort of sub-series within my podcast called The Alternative History of Al-Qaeda that looks at essentially what was going on with Al-Qaeda between their founding in the late 80s all the way up to 9/11, and all of these different figures within Al-Qaeda who are connected to the intelligence agencies, either working for them or being spied on by them or something like that. So it's quite a mishmash. It's quite a cross-section of different stuff that you can find in that podcast. And I try and, the best episodes, one that was just flashing up there, things like the Department of Homeland Security. I looked at how their Hollywood office works, but also in particular how this plays out in the movie about the Boston Marathon bombing, which is grossly misleading. And that film was supported by everyone. That had like military, FBI, local Boston agencies. I think Homeland Security also worked on that one. That is like one of the most state-sponsored movies of all time. And it tells almost entirely misleading and in some ways quite kind of bigoted version of events there. Avoids all of the questions, all of the outstanding stuff where people are wondering, well, hang on, what about the background of these Tsarnaevs who, again, had relatives in the security services, were clearly to some extent being spied on by the security services. It's, the film avoids all of that. Well, one of the reasons why it avoids all of that is because the very people who were doing all of this and who either screwed up massively or were up to something very evil and criminal were working on the movie. So the best episodes are stuff where, you can tie all of that kind of thing together. So there are a few of those.
Awesome. So people can check out Clandestine, and you can go for the links to whatever podcast site you want to listen to it on at spyculture.com. So you can see all of Tom's other outstanding research. I was looking through it for the last 48 hours. I was in awe at how much research you've done, just incredible research. So really glad to have you on and share your insights into Enemy of the State. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap up?
Well, just a quick plug, I guess, for Theatres of War. I mean, you spoke to Matt about it, but we do have this documentary that is on the verge of release, which kind of built on what we did in national security cinema, and to be honest, goes beyond some of the stuff I've even got on my website, though obviously it doesn't cover everything that's on the site, because then the documentary would be 50 hours long. But yeah, it's coming out soon. So if you keep an eye on my site, spyculture.com, or you keep an eye on Matt's Facebook page, The Writer with No Hands, as soon as it's available, we're hoping it should be out, DVD, streaming, all of those different things very, very soon. And that is probably going to be certainly the best entry point. It's a great primer for this topic, but it also gets quite deep into some of the detail as well. So if you want to learn more about what the government is up to in Hollywood, especially the DoD and CIA, go watch Theatres of War. As soon as it comes out, please try and get a copy, try and give it a watch, and let us know what you think, because it's kind of the culmination. I mean, like I say, I started this website and this project nearly a decade ago, and it's finally got to the point where I've not only written 2 books on it, there's this great educational documentary being made about it, which is really in-depth and entertaining to watch. So yeah, that's the thing that I really want people to see.
Yeah, let me know when that comes out. I will add it to the show notes of this. The documentary is Theatres of War, and it features your work. Also, it has Matthew Alford in it, and
Yeah.
I think it's Oliver Stone too, right?
Oliver Stone was interviewed for it. Yeah,
Oliver
he
Stone.
granted us some
You
time.
have some interesting people. And your website again is spyculture.com, and the podcast is Clandestine, and the researcher and author is Tom Secker. Tom, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Stay there.